Good afternoon. So to make the discussion more engaging, we have come up with a system on how we're going to regulate it. So when you want to ask a speaker, a panelist, a specific question, what you would do is you would give a high five. So you would raise your hand like that. And then if the question is general to anyone, you would do a mandla, which is your first close like this. So what will happen is we have Nandi, who's going to be in the audience. And if you have any questions to the panelists, then we'll have to, point you. Okay, to remind ourselves of who the speakers are, I'm guessing that you probably went through their profile, but we'll just read the first paragraph and then introduce them, and then we'll allow them to add on to the introduction. So we'll start on with Nothando Ndebele. So Nothando Ndebele is the head of African research at Renaissance Capital, a leading emerging markets investment firm, and she over a decade of experience in financial services, combining work in asset management, private equity, and a self-side analyst, and has also acted as an advisor at economic issues to Unity Government in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Nothando Ndebele. Okay, you can sit anyway, thank you. And then our second panelist is Elton Mpungu. And Elton Mpungu is an alumni of the College of University of Chicago, where he graduated with a liberal arts degree majoring in biological sciences. After graduating, he returned to Glen Norah in Zimbabwe, where he combines his education and summer jobs experience on Wall Street to identify with many of the challenges confronting the children and households in the community and contribute to solutions in facing them. Welcome, Elton Mpungu. Thank you. Okay, our third panelist is Angel Jones, and Angel Jones is the founder and CEO of Homecoming Revolution, which is a global one-stop platform that repatriates African talent from abroad. And she is a business owner, marketing aspect, and social change agent, a wife and mother. Angel was previously the co-founder and executive director of advertising agency Maury Jones, and her accolades include the finalists of Ernst & Young World Entrepreneur Awards in 2007 and the SABC2 Media and Communications Woman of the Year winner in 2004. Welcome, Angela Jones. Our fourth panelist is Patience Ndlovu. Patience Ndlovu is the chief of party for Vana Botswana project in Zimbabwe, and designed to support the government of Zimbabwe and local organizations and communities to mitigate the impact of HIV and AIDS on orphans and vulnerable children and their household. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Patience Ndlovu. Okay, our last panelist is Dr. Lael White, and Dr. Lael White is the director of the Center of Dynamic Markets and a senior lecturer at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, GIBS, in the University of Pretoria. And as a director for CDM, he drives research and learning in dynamic markets at GIBS, and he's also leads monthly executive network meetings to discuss issues of interest and importance in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Lael White. Okay, so today's discussion is on an important pillar at ALA, which is the commitment to Africa. And we're going to be discussing this under the theme Returning to Africa. And ALA is at a critical point where the first graduating class, I think 2008 or 2009, will actually be graduating from college. So they are the ones that are probably going to show us if this is really going to work. So we're going to start with the first question, and the first question is to the panel. What made you choose to leave Africa for the first time, and do you think it is the right choice to do so? Does anyone want to start? Anyone can start. Thank you.
I graduated from UCT and took a gap year off, thinking that I was going to only go and live abroad for a year, which turned into 7 years. But my heart always called me back home, and it was Nelson Mandela himself who stood on the embassy steps in Trafalgar Square, looking over all of us freezing cold South Africans, saying, "I love you all so much, I want to put you in my pocket and take you home." And the crowd went mad, and I looked around going, what on earth are we doing here? And I returned back and haven't looked back.
Maybe if I could just add on. For me, it was more of education opportunities. I got a chance, I got accepted into what I considered the best university in the world. That was University of Chicago, and I had an offer to go to University of Zimbabwe to study medicine. And at the time, I weighed between the two options, whether I do medicine in Zimbabwe or I go and do this liberal arts creature, out there. And I decided to take the risk, and it was worth it.
Probably a little bit similar for me. I grew up in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, which is a pretty small town, and so I always wanted to travel. So I went to Harvard for undergrad, and I think I always knew I wanted to come back to the continent. So I literally left the US 4 days after graduation, and I came back. I spent 2 years working in banking here, and then I left again. I went and I was a graduate student at Oxford, where I spent 2 years there. And then I decided to get some work experience, so I spent 4 years working in London before I moved back. So I think the motivation to go was to get international experience, to get some exposure, and also to pursue, my educational studies. I think it is good to see and experience different places, but I've always felt a strong pull back to the continent.
Afternoon, everybody. Is this the graveyard shift? I've left Africa and come back a number of times. I've left South Africa and come back a number of times, a little like a boomerang. I always, as soon as I leave, I feel the need to go back again. So, but the first time I did this was when I was 18 years old. I left for Argentina. I've always had this this wanderlust, and I don't think I've ever managed to conquer that, and that's probably why I get involved in the type of work that I'm involved in. And at that stage, at 18, I was hungry for cultural diversity and knowing the world, and especially the Latin American dimension of that. Fast forward then to around 28, 29 years old, and I left to pursue my education, pretty much like my fellow panelists. I pursued a PhD, and it was again in Latin American studies, and the United States offered the best course of action for that. So I did most of my PhD then at Berkeley in San Francisco, which was a wonderful place to do that, and I came home very, very quickly again after that.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. I don't have much to say about leaving the continent. I had a chance to do that, and I chose not to take it. So most of what I'm going to talk about are the opportunities on the continent. And yes, I have traveled in my work because I'm in the social sector. I'm in a non-profit organization called World Education International. And I think what you see on your profile is more of a project that is US government funded, where they call me chief of party. I throw lots of nice parties. I'm sorry. I'm kidding, but it just means the director of the program, but they love to call it chief of party for some reason. So I'm going to talk more about the opportunities and why I didn't go out when I got the opportunity. I think like everyone else, it's just the pull to the continent and wanting to make a difference. So we'll talk a little more about that.
Just to remind the audience again, if the question is specific, you do open fist, which is a high five, and if it's general to the panelists, you do a mandla, which is closed fist, and then we'll Nandi and we'll take it up. The second question is, what made you decide what you wanted to come back to Africa for? Were you affected by probably visa limitations, or were you affected by the fact that your parents are calling you back in the continent? What actually made you come back to Africa?
Yeah, we can start on this side. Mine was actually a very simple thing. I wanted to get back to my friends, and it was really the people and friends. I found that look, you meet incredible people when you travel, and you learn a lot from them, and you grow enormously as an individual. But I just found that the nature of our friendships and the types of people that I engaged with here that was what was drawing me back. And I think more recently it was also opportunity, and I think that's going to be increasingly the case, is that Africans are going to be drawn back to South Africa and to other African countries, and especially to other African countries, for the economic opportunities that are emerging?
So I was working in London for the Saachi brothers. I'm sure you've heard of Morris Saachi and Charles Saachi. They had a big organization, huge big advertising, multinational business called Saachi and Saachi. And they actually broke away and started a new advertising business called M&C Saachi, and I was luckily in the right place at the right time, so worked with them in London for 7 years, which was the most remarkable experience, being able to work with Bob Geldof and Robbie Williams, and flying around the world to New York just to shoot one cigarette package in those days, the crazy, crazy life of advertising. I was there for 7 years. I knew that I wanted to come back. I had this absolute feeling of where was my purpose? Where did I belong? Why was I building somebody else's economy instead of my own? And realized, watching these businessmen, that they were opening now new agencies in different regions. And I'd realized they didn't have an office yet in South Africa. And so I did my research. I went to talk to a number of different people who were back in South Africa being entrepreneurs. And then I remember praying the night before that when I went to present to the Saachi brothers in London to tell them they needed a South African office, I remember praying like crazy that the tablecloth would be on the glass table when I presented, because I knew that my knees were going to be shaking so much that if the tablecloth wasn't on there, they would see straight through how terrified I was. But thank goodness there was a nice big cloth on the table. And I said, Lord Saachi, it's about time you had an African office, and the right place to do that is in Johannesburg, and you need to fund me to go home to start your branch to do it. And remarkably, it worked. So I returned home with the funding to open up an advertising agency, which a year later I was able to buy out independently as my own. But we see that as a common thing. People want to return home for a sense of purpose and belonging. But if you're able to speak to some multinational who need representation in Africa, it's a very good idea that you say, I'm the champion to be able to do that.
All right. Well, I think mine is a little, while everyone laughs about visa limitations, those are real, right? But, you know, for me, it was sort of a combination. I think in the 4 years being an undergrad, being there, first thing that I realized in my first year that I really didn't want to do medicine, right? So, you know, it was like, good call. I turned that one down. I probably would have been unhappy. Then it was like, if I'm not doing medicine, what next, right? So it took a little bit of a journey, you know, trying to figure that out, and that took me through Wall Street, you know, doing it. At that time, everyone was kind of going there. You know, it was at University of Chicago, economics is a very popular degree. So all the major banks would come, and then you get an internship, etc. So I did work for Bank of America, and then for a while I also worked for municipal insurer, was also doing structured finance, etc. So I got a good bit of exposure. But after graduation, the financial crisis had hit. The US was in recession. Getting a job, you know, at the time there wasn't as easy as, you know, the other options as it was in the years before. And the American system is that every time you go for an internship, you use up what they call optional practical training. So it's like a year after you graduate, you know. So after I graduated, you know, I think I had about 6 months or 9 months of OPT time left. So, you know, it was sort of weighing. And at the time, I had friends, family in Canada, the UK. So like, okay, let me go and explore. But, you know, kind of sitting there, the question really became, why do I want to remain, you know, in the States? What value addition am I going to bring? And at the time, in 2008, Zimbabwe was burning, right? You know, you had this whole hyperinflationary environment, and all the news you're getting on the internet is that, you know, it's terrible to go back home. But then a couple of things kicked in. You know, there was dollarization, and, you know, talking to people on the phone, it's like, you know, things have somewhat stabilized. So I had, you know, in my mind, I was like, okay, let me go back home, First of all, I spent some time here in South Africa trying to see what opportunities were available. And I think home is home. At some level, the comfort level of being in Joburg, it never grew on me. I went to Cape Town, still didn't work. I just didn't feel, so I said, I'm going back home and seeing, what difference. And there's specific things that I wanted to do. And, I wanted to see how they would pan out. And there's certain, when I go to the ground, they enjoying world education. Just to clarify, Patience is my boss. So I've been in world education for 4.5 years. It's been fantastic getting the opportunity to actually do, make a change and see and implement the ideas that we had, because they are the resources to be able to do it. So just to kind of go back to the question, what it was, I think it was a combination of, somewhat not, knowing exactly what I wanted to do, visa limitations, opportunities, at home, to explore in certain sectors. And I came back and I found them, and it's been good.
When I graduated, I actually had no clue what to do. And what you'll find with going to a liberal arts university is that you study a lot of very interesting things, but they don't necessarily make you specialize you in any way for a particular job. So I knew I wanted to come back to the continent, but really I just had no clue how to even get a job on the continent. But I was very fortunate that when I was at Harvard undergrad, there were African students at the business school who were starting their own business, and I guess they needed a skivvy, and they just took me along with them. And I just went for the ride. I had no idea what finance was. I had no idea what asset management was. But I just said, okay, I'll move with you to South Africa. And that's how I got into finance. So I knew I wanted to be back on the continent, but I had no pull into finance, no pull into consulting. But 6 months into it, I realized actually this is what I like to do. I'm good with numbers. I like working with numbers, and I've stayed. But literally fell into it by chance.
We have seen in the media that they would have ratings about countries and say, the top 10 emerging economies in Africa. So the question leading up to that is that how did you then decide where you're going to be based? Why didn't you probably decide to be in Somali? Or, and what advice would you give to the audience? Should they go back to these emerging economies, or should they be starting new companies in places where they don't exist?
No, I think you should really go where opportunity knocks. And it knocks on different places for different things, Right now, if you want to build a Coca-Cola plant, you should think of going to Somalia, because Coca-Cola wants to build a big plant there. Or if you want to work for Google, then maybe you should go to Nairobi. If you really want to work in big banking, then you need to consider probably Johannesburg or Lagos. But it's all of, I don't think there's any one specific country that offers you one place to go. I think it's about looking at what interests you, what are you good at, and there's lots of things you can do around the continent. And it's not just in business or finance. It's whether you want to go into the social side of things, you want to go into community development. I think you can really explore a lot of different options.
I agree with that. And I think, if you look at the continent on a wide spectrum, and you have heard it, that Africa is the next giant for everything. If you look at the West is saturated in terms of development, literally, but this continent offers you a lot of opportunity. And, like Notando was saying, it's where the opportunity is knocking. So I know that sometimes for some of us who are extremely, patriotic, you want to say, okay, I'm going to go back home to my country. That is good too, because you want to make an input into your country and you want to contribute to the country. And the issue of purpose that Angel was talking about is very critical when it comes to that, because then it's about who am I, what am I seeking to do? Because, trying to do something that you're not passionate about or that you don't believe in will not sustain you. You need to identify what it is you're passionate about. And it's not always cast in stone, like you're going to know it immediately. Like she was saying, sometimes it's like chance. It just happens, and then immediately you find out this is what you love to do. But I know with you guys here, you've done a lot of profiling, you love numbers or you love people, and so, you choose which pathway you want to take. But the continent is full of opportunity, and that is the message that you hear all around, that this is the next giant in the world, literally. So, the opportunities are here, and take them.
I sort of want to re-emphasize what both of them are saying. I think it's good if you have a game plan and you know for sure that this is where I want to be, this is what I want to, it makes life easier. You can just work your way towards that. But at the same time, I think most of probably where you end up is a function of the network that you build, the relationships that you have, and, somewhat the place where you happen to be when things are, I'll give a good example. A friend of mine ended up, she studied French. She had a friend who ended up, the friend was a graduate from London Business School and got a job to go and work in Gabon, right? So she made a visit. She was invited to go to Gabon, and she had never been there. And what she found, was really this, just economy which was relying on everything coming in from Paris. The meat is imported from Paris, the cheese is from Paris. It's like a mini Paris, right? But they don't produce anything. They're very reliant on oil, etc. And from that, she had contacts, she had relationships, people who were growing roses in Zimbabwe before, and then they'd relocated to South Africa, and some of them, she also knew that in Kenya, there's a region where they grow flowers, right? So now she's started a flower import business, where she's importing flowers from Kenya into Gabon, and pretty much there was no one who was doing that, and it was a real opportunity. So in a way, you could be starting off going back to your home base because that's where you have the networks, but then like Notando, it is the alumni network who are coming into Joburg, or it is that visit that you do into another country and then you see a real opportunity, and that probably would determine, where you somewhat end up.
Mr. Alton, we have a question from the audience, specific to you. Yeah, you can ask.
Hi, my name is Sharon and I'm from South Africa. I would like to ask Ms. Ndebele, do you think it helps especially in the financial sector, do you think Western education and Western work experience helps solve South African or African financial crisis, or would it have been better to gain South African education to solve Africans' problem?
I think ideally you want to be in a workforce that has a mix of people with different backgrounds and different experiences. If you think about what you gain in being in the West, or being educated in the West, or working for, let's say, a Western bank, is that you've seen some of the developmental stages that we are going through in Africa right now. So you have that experience. But what you also get from your local colleagues, whether they're here or they're in Gabon or DRC, is they have the local expertise. So you've got to be able to apply those two things together. It's almost a bottom-up and a top-down approach. I think you need the two. And I think that's also what's becoming interesting about the continent, is that when you move around, you'll find that it's a lot more cosmopolitan than it used to be. So you won't just find only Zambians working in Zambia. You may go to Rwanda and find there are Zambians in Rwanda, or there are Rwandese working in Cote d'Ivoire, or something like that. But I think it's bringing that mix together that's important. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I just think the opportunity to go abroad probably widens your experience pool.
If I may comment on, is it better to come back to Africa as a continent, or within your own homeland, your own home city? We see a lot of people returning back, and they often say, I'm home, even though they might be living in Kampala and they actually are from Ghana. There's this thing among Africans. If you put your hand on your heart, do you know that your heart is actually in the shape of Africa? People often feel, I'm home. So there's this wonderful emotional feeling that people have. They're back on the continent fulfilling some kind of dream and purpose. But if it's money that you're after, and don't kid yourself, you all need to make sure that you earn a good living. Obviously, it's going where the opportunities are. But what we're finding very interestingly is people return home. Some of the top entrepreneurs in East and West and Southern Africa, some of the top entrepreneurs are people who came home and they saw what was bad about the country as an opportunity. So it is a trade-off to return home. I promise you, you guys are going to live abroad, you're going to see how amazing it is. You know, all the lovely amenities, the convenience, the connectivity, the roads, the electricity, everything works. Often you come back and it's not like that. And you go, oh my gosh, now, you know, why have I come back? It was so much easier living abroad. But there are people who've seen that the fact that there isn't such good connectivity as an entrepreneurial opportunity, the fact that the roads aren't good, or maybe I should get into construction. So I would say keep your eyes and ears very wide open. You might come back into corporate and then slip into entrepreneurship, or you might just have this cunning plan to come back and create lots of jobs as an entrepreneur first time round, and see those bad things as actual opportunities to get involved in.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to echo that. Really, I'm from a business school, so when you look at the literature around strategy, there's a strong literature around this, and I think Africa is the best example of this. Is that what we call this absence of institutions actually, while Africa might be the fastest growing, and it is now the fastest growing region in the world, it still needs so much, and there's still so much to be done. So the opportunities are there, and the gaps in these institutions and the service delivery are exactly what people like yourselves are there to provide now. You're going to fill those, and that's where you are ahead of your counterparts in the West and the North, in the United States and Europe perhaps, because you know the context, you understand the context, it's in your DNA, and you have the abilities, the natural abilities to fill those voids. Just one last little point again, and I'm just drawing from my my orientation at the business school. As I mentioned, Africa is the fastest growing region on the planet at the moment. It has got the fastest returns, or the largest returns on investments. It does need a lot. There's a lot still to be done. But in the business school context, for the last 2 or 3 decades, we've been using East Asia, Southeast Asia as the case study of growth economies. That's going to change now. The case studies that we're going to be teaching about are the case studies in Africa. And your time is now. You are very, very fortunate. Your time is now to take advantage of those enormous growth opportunities that are starting to emerge.
We have a question to the entire panel from the audience.
Okay. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Khabani Lekena. I'm from South Africa. So my question to you guys is, so we've heard a lot about the role that the youth have to play in the coming years of society. But we all know that we still have to finish school. There's a lot we have to do, and that at the end of the day, once we start working, we're not going to be working alone. What role do you see your generation, who are still working, who are still doing their thing? Do you guys think you guys have and will have in the future in this this boom that Africa is currently having or will have in the future? As we come through, as young guys will come through under you or beside you, maybe some of the forerunners. Just what do you guys see as the role of your generation in developing Africa as well?
I was going to say, we're not dead yet. I mean, we may look old, but we're not that old.
And I thought we were the youth. I thought, yeah. we are still the youth, aren't we?
So hopefully we'll still be around when you graduate from college. I think there's a lot of work to be done still on this continent, so let's not underestimate it. If we look at the number of people who still live below $1 a day, for instance, I think it's going to take more than us. It's going to take more than everyone in this room. The important part that we play is really mentoring and developing people, because your education doesn't end when you leave university. As I said, you leave university, you don't really have a lot of practical skills. So the first couple of years when you start working, people are still investing in you because they're making you somebody who can be productive in a workplace. And that's the role that you play in time, is that I work with a team of analysts, and some of them are straight out of university, some of them are straight out of graduate programs, some of them have got experience, and the amount of time I spend with them will differ depending on where they are on the experience curve. So there's a role each of us play in just developing ourselves. I have mentors myself, and they're also still working, so they're not out of the game either. But I think it's a continual development and reinforcement of who we are and where we're trying to take this continent to.
Yeah, definitely. Mentorship and coaching, very critical for for this generation. But I think if we can understand as well that we are one group that has to work together in a synergized way. When in my work, because I'm in the social sector, and we are mostly working towards uplifting the lives of vulnerable children and their households, what I see working with, and we have a very young workforce that we have in our organization, I see a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, a lot of, the IT, just being so IT apt in what we need to do and moving forward. So what I see providing myself is more, strategic direction, helping you think into the future because of the experience that I've acquired. But what I gain from the young people I'm working with is just the creativity, the innovation, just being with the times and all of that. So we need to work together like that. So my encouragement to you is that, you are in this leadership school, you are taught a lot, but when you go into the, work environment, you start gaining experience and learning the ropes, as they say. You have to stay very open-minded. Right? You have to be very open-minded. I attended one of your sessions yesterday on professional development, and one of the guys was talking about being humble so that you can learn. You still need to be humble enough to learn and to get all of this experience that, those who have gone before you have, so that you are able to, learn within a short period of time. If you are arrogant and you think you know it all, it becomes very difficult for you to move forward. So it's important that you are open-minded, you are open to learning, you continue to learn, and you take mentorship and coaching very seriously from those that are before you. So that's what I have to say.
I think that our job is certainly to mentor, but and it's up to you to drive that mentorship relationship. I'm sure you're all told about that. You're the ones who need to phone and book and drive the agenda and set the tasks and follow through. But we are still kids. We've got our eyes wide open. We need to learn from you. We need to inspire you, but you need to inspire us. And what we can do is help you with the network. I mean, it's exactly as Alton was telling you. We can help you, introduce you to people. But if we do that, we are taking a big chance on you. And that's when it's up to you to go that extra mile. When I went to the Saachi brothers, even though I only had a year under my belt of advertising, they didn't have a job for me, but they had a secretarial opening. So even with my honors degree, I worked as a secretary during the day. At night, I worked on copywriting with a partner, and we created ads at night, and I literally had a sleeping bag under my desk, and I worked my ass off for 2.5 years before I got a formal job. So as much as we're here, you need to help us help you, and take your blinkers off. It's damn hard work.
What has been the greatest challenge in working in Africa? And if you had one, how did you overcome it?
All right, maybe let me start. I think for me, for those of you who are going back to the States, who are going to the States, studying in the States, it's fantastic. I think that the value of a liberal arts degree for most of the colleges, I think some say they're going to Lafayette, some are going to Babson, etc. And those programs really give you a liberal arts degree, and like not to understand, I think she went through one as well. Coming back, there was sort of an adjustment that had to happen. First of all, going up to someone and saying, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Biological Sciences, they kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? You know, when did bio become an art? Right. But then, you know, it was sort of then going beyond that and trying to then say, no, this is the education that I got, and these are the opportunities that I'm looking for, and this is what I intend to do. So, you know, it wasn't smooth sailing, and I think that adjustment of, you know, in the US there's certain systems. Here we also have our own systems which don't quite fit, you know. So I think for some things you'll find that for you to, you know, whereas before you could go into a lab and just work, here there's no, like most of the research that is done is not really like research with animals and mice and all that kind of stuff. It's really research around humans. So the kind of requirements that they put on you for you to work with specimen is you need to have like a 5 years degree and some certification, etc. So it limits some of the stuff that you would do, and in some way, you know, it took a while before I sort of figured out this, you know, what the system was like, and then seeing, yes, now because these are the requirements and I want to go here, how do I go around those things which are sort of stopping me from progressing? So there's definitely, I think, an adjustment challenge.
I think one of the great difficulties is it's quite an obvious thing because we talk about it a lot. Africa is very clearly the most diverse continent on the planet as well in terms of cultural groups, ethnic groups, languages. It's got over 2,000 languages that are spoken across the continent. But as humans, we are built in with assumptions. And I think one of the greatest challenges is for us to park those assumptions and to go forward. And it gets harder as you get older, believe me. I've been told by the older people. But it gets harder as you get older to park your assumptions. And I have to, but that's what you have to do. So I spent some time in Rwanda a few years ago. And the assumption is that it's in the East African community. So having been exposed a little bit to Kenya, you think maybe it's the same thing. You couldn't get two countries that are so far apart. And you'll know that from the people that you spend time with here at the academy, is how different the African cultures are. And no matter how much we insist on approaching Africa in a much more granular way, human nature wants us to kind of lump things together and just categorize them. We have to keep our minds as open as possible and park those assumptions wherever we go.
I mean, I think for me, part of the challenge as well is that you come out of university and you're feeling very proud of yourself. You've gone to a great university. And then I came back and started working, and nobody was necessarily that impressed, which was a shock to the system. First of all, they didn't understand the liberal arts degree. So they're like, well, what did you learn? Did you learn accounting? You're like, no, I didn't. Well, then how are you possibly going to do any finance if you don't know accounting? You're not an accountant. So there was a period of adjustment where you've got to realize that you've been in a completely different system, especially if you've been in the American system. There's an American way of thinking, and you move back onto the continent, and things have been, people have been progressing and moving on without you. So they haven't really, their lives haven't stopped to wait for you to come back home. And you need to understand that, and also understand that there are a lot of very smart people who never left the continent. So if you come back and think, I must be the best because I went to such and such a school, and then you come back here and you realize, actually, I'm pretty ordinary, and I need to work just as hard as everybody else to prove myself again.
So returning home for me, I lived abroad for 7 years. I came back, started a business. And there were so many positives. I mean, they absolutely outweighed the negatives. The negatives were feeling unsafe. I think, South Africa has the highest level of crime. I mean, it's an absolute unacceptably high level. A challenge, too, was the perception that people had abroad of South Africa. And that's the very reason we started Homecoming Revolution, was to tell the stories, the facts, about how well South Africa actually was doing, and also telling the stories of people who've returned home and are really making it happen. So what I would say in this context is, arm yourself and equip yourself with facts about the continent, and arm and equip yourself with the stories of people doing amazing things. So when anybody around a dinner table and wherever is, you know, saying about the terrible state of wherever it is, you can actually speak very authoritatively on facts and figures that will all stun them and have their jaws dropping open.
We have a question from the audience. Yeah.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Tony Kirumba, and I'm from Kenya. So one of the issues that came up when we were having our discussion in the library block was the social challenges of coming back to Africa, especially if you've been working for some time, if you're in your late 20s, maybe early 30s. And the challenge that we particularly focused on was like social relationships. And I'm sure that one thing that a lot of ALA students can relate to is finding someone special from somewhere that you completely did not expect, and making those connections in a way that draws you and holds you to a place. So my question to you is how you were able to deal with that particular social challenge, if it did exist, or any other social obstacles towards coming back home.
So I avoided British men like the plague. I dated one or two of them, but needed a good old African. But what we find is that for people coming back, they often go, oh, I don't know if I can return home because my spouse is a foreigner or my girlfriend is a foreigner. And ironically, we just say, well, just invite them back for Christmas. You know, and often when these partners see how amazing it is back home and the warmth and the family and the weather and it all there, it's often the foreign spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend who says, hey, I think we can come back. But you've got to find out where you're happiest. And if you're happiest in your partner's arms in a foreign country, you've got to be true to that. If you're happy at home, you convince them to come back.
Just stay single, it keeps you free.
I'm not going to talk about marriage, but I'm going to talk about relationships, but I'm going to talk about your social obligations in terms of, because I think when you go abroad and you come back, you know, there's this perception that people think, you know, all of a sudden you're going to meet all the, you know, you're going to solve all the problems in your village and in your wherever where you come from, because there's just this perception. I think in my country we had it for quite a while, and they're expecting you to look after the siblings and so on and so forth. I think that is you know, that's an expectation that you cannot take away, but it's how you manage those expectations. You have to communicate, and people have to understand that, you know, you had Notando saying, you know, I came back and no one was even looking at me at work and thinking, but it's these whole perceptions that you have to manage about your social obligations, which brings me to the issue of, you know, opportunities that open for you, whether, because what normally then happens is either you are scared to come back because of this social, you know, obligations, everybody expecting you to do something, and maybe you think, let me go on and do my, further my studies, my master's degree and PhD and all of that. I think you have to be careful about that, because you are trying to enter into, you know, into the working world, and at the same time, you want to advance your school and so forth. So what you need to do, my advice to you, because I did my advanced you know, degree when I was working, it is more helpful for you to do that, because now with all your other social obligations, you are able to start making a living and start, you know, contributing, whether it's to your family or so forth, because you are coming from different social backgrounds. So if you can manage that, you know, don't be under pressure to move on to your advanced degree before you can make some inroads into a working life, so that you can manage some of those social obligations and expectations that, you know, that are expected of you. I don't know whether that makes sense.
I mean, I think part of coming back and integrating is really up to you. You know, if you come back and you don't make an effort to get to know the country you're now living in, whether it's your home country or it's another African country, you're going to find it very hard to integrate. So if you spend all your time staying up at midnight to watch Chicago Bulls or, you know, or watch baseball in the US, and you know nothing about the sports that are played on the continent, you probably will find it hard to reintegrate. And if you don't read any of the local newspapers or publications that are pertinent to the continent, again, you'll find it hard to integrate. So, you know, it's a large part of it is you need to go out and make those social connections. You know, we used to talk about people who we used to call the when I was, because they spend the rest of their life saying, when I was in London or when I was in New York, and they live their life looking back to, you know, and they don't actually appreciate the fact that they're back. But that's also up to you. If you want to be a when I was, you can actually spend your life being a when I was.
We have 2 questions from the floor. First question from Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Palolo, and I'm from the United States, and I was fortunate enough to complete a gap year at the Academy. So I will pose my question from the perspective of a Westerner who's actually turned her focus to Africa. And I think it's fair to say that everybody in this room is pretty fortunate to be privy to the fact that Africa is the next big thing. And my question for you is, while we're abroad, what can we do to help convince others of that fact?
Well, I'll kick it off, but I suppose most people will probably echo these statements. Is just, I think you just have to make it, or you just have to tell, you have to expose more people to the change in story that is unfolding here in Africa, because as much as you say this is the next big thing, there's still we still have the after effects of decades of problems, of conflict, of poor growth and all the rest of it. And so we need to make it more and more clear that the story has changed, and that the solutions to the problems that we have are so different solutions from what they were before. Africa is no longer the begging bowl that has been depicted by the West. Africa now is the great opportunity, and Africans are going to take Africa to the next level.
If you wouldn't mind telling everybody you meet about Homecoming Revolution. homecomingrevolution.com. And there, apart from the international events we have, which showcases all the property schools, job opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities back on the continent, we also feature the stories of people who've returned home. So by logging on there and seeing, I mean, the stories are what do it. If you think about how to help somebody remember something, you frame it in a story. So there's Andrew Mvua, who returned home he returned home back to Kenya after living abroad for 17 years because he was lucky to help Obama get into the presidency as a field worker. He started and then moved up the level. And he realized that if somebody like Obama, with a shitty name, as he says, a very inconvenient name, mixed race, broken family, can be president, then he has himself run out of excuses to come back. But there's Tunde Ogunrunde, who came back to Nigeria, having worked for Burger King for 20 years, came back and was a founder of Chicken Republic, which is now the biggest chicken franchise. There is Teddy, what's his surname, who came back and started an amazing IT company, as did Kofi Dadzi in Ghana. And there are these human stories of people who've come back and made the most amazing success within Africa. And if you can arm yourself with enough of those stories and attend our events, then we can create a wave of social, economic, and prosperity change for Africa.
The immediate thing is to bring your friends back with you. Just bring them on holiday. Seriously, when you expose them to this place, it will just dispel all those mysteries about Africa. Bring them here, and when they get a taste of it, you'll not be able to.
Ngwenya.
Good afternoon. Just a question to the panel. I'm Ngwenya Ramateku from South Africa, Joburg particularly. So I wanted to ask, I can see that there's this, talking about the future of Africa and all that, it's like there's this specified path, like go to school, go to varsity, blah, blah, blah. So there's there's a stress on formal education as the solution. But then I always disagreed with that, although I am following that path anyway. But then I just wanted to know, like I feel sometimes formal education sort of restricts you at some point. So what would you say to a young person sitting there debating in their head whether they should go to school, further their education, maybe through varsity, or should they just put that on pause or drop that entirely and just decide to follow whatever project they're trying to start and so on?
I'll answer that very, very quickly. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. So, and we've been talking about it now. You can pursue projects if you've got some brilliant idea. Look, it's hard work. And as we heard, you've got to work your ass off to get to places. And you will have to work a lot harder than what we've had to work. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So my passion was to travel. But I pursued a formal line of education, but I'd work to raise enough money to be able to take myself backpacking through South America every single year for the years that I was at varsity. And sometimes maybe I was at varsity for too long, but it was so that I could do backpacking a bit longer. And yeah, you can do that. And so if that's what your passion is, pursue both passions. Everything is possible.
Yeah, no, I wanted to echo that. I mean, you don't have to go through a formal way of doing things. There's what is called non-formal education, where you can actually do your projects at the same time you are pursuing an education. Because you can't, you reach a certain limit depending on your education and how far you have gone conceptually. So I don't think you can say to yourself, let me just do a project and I won't do anything. You will see that when you start doing the project, you then need a certain level of understanding to take you to the next level. So you can't, they are not mutually exclusive. You can either go formal education, then go back and do what you have to do, or you can start doing your project and do that alongside in education, because you can't separate the two.
But have no doubt, the way the world works is through the network. You need the education for yourself, for your own brain, but the power of a degree or an Ivy League jersey or the door opens wide. Make no mistake, that's how the world works.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo that. Unless you're extremely talented in something or have an extremely good idea. I mean, for every Beyonce, there's probably a million Beyonce wannabes who haven't even made it to center stage. So, or for every Bill Gates, there's a lot of people sitting in their home, in their garages, hoping to build a computer. The good thing about an education is that it gives you a base. It gives you a way of thinking, it gives you a base when all else fails. So don't disregard it too quickly.
Hello, I'm Wanson Begeni from South Africa, and my question is to the whole panel. How did you adapt to the change in economics, more importantly, like job finding from dollars to rand, and what was your challenges?
Well, I think my experience, I think I would leave this question to Notando and the other guys who come to South Africa, who they need to adjust. What I'm think you're sort of trying to get at is the income levels from the other countries, and then when you come here, it's not just about the currency exchange rate. It really is about how much maybe you could have been earning and what you could buy there versus what you have to do here. Is that correct? Right. I think there's always a tension, between the two. When I was in New York, right, the rent, you could, at the time I was getting paid $5,000 per month, but the rent was $2,000 or $3,000, depending on where you were staying. And then the lifestyle, etc., it was almost such that at the end of the month, you almost could be looking at the next paycheck, right? You might not be earning as much here, but you could sort of still maintain the same level of lifestyle, give and take, depending on how you would do, you're sort of living out your lifestyle. So I think it's sort of very individual based in terms of your approach, in terms of your lifestyle. But in terms of the currency thing in Zimbabwe, when I moved back, really I didn't have to deal with that. We are using all the currencies in the world. We have this, so it wasn't an issue.
There are pluses and negatives to both. I mean, when I moved back from the UK, I think I spent a month eating steak every night because it just seems so cheap after London. And then you stop converting in your mind. But you do, you know, there's the big thing is thinking, what have I given up economically to come back home? Because people in London or New York may probably make higher salaries than you, but your standard of living is actually quite different here as well. I mean, I look at, you know, where my friends live in London. Now having been back quite a number of years now, I think, oh no, I couldn't live in a little one-bedroom flat in London anymore. But in London, that's a big deal. So you've got to weigh the positives and the negatives, and you've got to understand why you're home. It's impossible for you if you're living in some very small country in Africa that you're going to make the same as somebody who works 23 hours a day at a law corporate firm in New York. But you probably have all your weekends off. They may not. So there is a bit of give and take around it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that point. You can't actually compare dollar for rand in that strict sense, because what you're gaining in some areas, you're losing in another. We certainly find that when we talk to people and they've returned home not just for the job, they've returned home to be with friends and family, the sense of purpose, the sense of belonging, the sense of waking up every morning, feel like, you know, you really are fulfilling who you're meant to be on this planet, that does outweigh possibly a lower salary.
Hi, I'm Shahida from Nigeria. I just wanted to ask what you think about people that study maybe sciences or like maybe medical research, and they have to come back and there are no resources. I mean, would it be too hopeful to imagine that by that time we would have had resources? Or like, I don't know, some technical scientific advancement?
Okay, let me try and tackle that. I think the pace at which we're talking about, I think when you go, like for me, when I went to the university, right? This is a university, I think they have an $8 billion endowment, right? And that's almost double the size of the economy. I don't know what GDP for Zimbabwe is right now, but it's almost double that, right? So, and this is dedicated to this one institution whose sole focus is to be the best in the world. You know, so kind of also they were contributing, etc. So I think given from now to the time you graduate, realistically speaking, you probably won't have as much resources available to you as those that are available at that particular institution. But the things that are going on, you'd find there are so many partnerships that are going on. I think you can take your pick, any major university. I think University of Pretoria has linkages and partnerships with universities that are in the States, that are in Europe. University of Zimbabwe, in Zimbabwe has UCSF, has all these other guys. So sometimes you can actually tap into the resources of these major research institutions and actually utilize them within the country context. So if you sort of can work your way, because if you're there in the States and you have that degree and you have the network, right, and you have a very clear particular thing that you want to do here, you could get the resources down to be able to do and to advance, and in some way sort of like creating this platform for yourself.
What is your opinion about someone having influence on Africa but not necessarily living in Africa? Say you have a project or an initiative that is influencing Africa positively, but you don't live in Africa.
I have a great opinion of those people, but I think there's always a tension. Right. I think we've in all these discussions, for me, what I'm hearing, you know, there's a social pressure, there's the economic factor, there is all these trade-offs of where you're best placed to be able to make the impact that you're making. So depending on who you are and where you're situated, right, you could be better off being somewhere else. Because I know I have a couple of friends who are sort of doing this dual partnership, where one is based in the States and one is based in here, right? And the one who's based in the States is doing the networking and the business side there in the States, right? And then there's someone who's here who's doing the networking and things here. So that kind of relationships is working very well because they're connecting, you know, they know what's happening here, there's constant feedback, etc. So in that respect, I do have, you know, very good, high regard for the kind of stuff and impact that they're making.
I'll add something to that. I do think that the networks beyond Africa are all important and they are part of Africa's future, but Africa is a deeply contextual place. And if you are really and truly keen on understanding Africa and its various markets and its various sub-markets, you have to be here. The other, and this applies very much to research as well. So I'm talking more about the research criteria for Africa, because as we know, in the world data is poor, but in Africa, the numbers that you see on Africa are by and large fictional. They are very they don't really tell the full story. So to get the story, you have to actually immerse yourself in the environments. So if I want to know something about Nigeria, about Lagos, I can't just sit at my desktop and plow through enormous numbers of books and research reports and whatnot, and visit the World Bank website. I've got to go to Lagos. I've got to immerse myself in Ethiopia if I want to go up and see what's going on. It doesn't help just reading about it.
But what I'd like to add to that is that you can make a difference, really. Any difference is a difference. And also, trust your heart, really. You know, figure out what's your purpose, where do you belong. But the last thing you should do is feel blackmailed to return home too early. You know, you really, you'll know when you know. So trust that.
I wanted to make a comment in terms of the social sector. You know, it's more fulfilling, and it makes more sense, and you understand a little more if you are working with disadvantaged communities and you are for community development and social development and all of that, to be on the continent, because then you are interacting with the people, you are really getting to know who they are and, you know, what the issues are, rather when you are outside. So I'm just talking from that perspective in terms of some of you who are interested in doing, you know, social community development work.
I mean, I think I would also just stress that it's important to come home for the right reasons. You know, don't feel pressurized to. Some people come home after a year, some people come home after 50 years, some people never come back. But if you come back feeling you were blackmailed or you had to come back, you probably won't enjoy coming back and you won't give it your full contribution. So come home because you want to be in Africa, because you want to be involved on the continent, not because you feel like, oh, I have to, otherwise I'll look bad.
And if I can just add and say, I mean, you remember from, I've forgotten his name, the guy who did part of the presentation yesterday. You saw his profile from when he was born in Bulawayo all the way, and he has traveled everywhere. And I think he spent almost 10 plus years working outside the continent, and he got to a point where he felt, now I want to come back home, I'm ready to come back home. So, you know, don't try to make it like, oh, cast in stone, and, you know, you really have to, by year 2, year 3, year 4, this is what has to be happening. Just allow some of it to unfold as you learn, as you understand your environment, as you understand who you are as a person. So give yourself a chance to know who you are, and don't be under pressure. Yeah.
I would like to thank the panelists for making it today on the discussion on returning to Africa, and we'll close the discussion. Thank you.